Thanks for having me, everyone. I guess I want to start by reiterating a lot of what Crispin has just said, and some of that involves propaganda. And it's a very powerful tool. I can tell you that because I was asked to look at the aging problem that we have. And the very fact that it was called an aging problem is an indication of how effective the propaganda has been. I initially thought I would be writing a report that would be very difficult to write, having to explain that yes, maybe aging's a little costly, but maybe it's worth it because of the negative environmental effects of a rapidly growing population. But the data actually says the opposite. An aging population grows faster, has much better economic outcomes than the alternative, a younger population. So I thought that was quite profound, that I already was skeptical, but yet in the back of my mind was still that idea that yes, the default assumption is that aging is costly. So I was asked to look at the effect of aging on participation and economic performance, how immigration affects the age structure of the population, and the costs of infrastructure at various levels of population growth that we might need. Again, I'm talking as if aging is costly, that we might need to address aging. So what I want to do today, Crispin took many of my good lines already. I hope he's read the report. But what I want to do today is share with you a lot of the data behind my analysis and sort of empower you to start telling a different story about aging, because we're not going to change people's mind at large with the data and the graphs, but we're going to change minds with better stories about what an aging society looks like. Okay? So there's three real elements to the established story about the costs of aging. One is that older people stop working, they become lazy and unproductive with high health needs and are a burden on everybody else, and that's really bad. The second part of the story is that high immigration, the higher the immigration, the younger it makes your population, and so we can fix that cost by boosting immigration rates. And the third part of the story, which we are now hearing more of, is that, well, we can accommodate very rapid population growth. It's just a matter of building infrastructure and better planning. Okay, we can just build it. It's a political barrier. That's all it is. If we had better politicians, we could grow at 2% indefinitely, and we could build as many new roads, railway lines, water supply, you name it. It would be easy. It's a political problem. It's not an economic barrier. This story is wrong on all three fronts. Okay? The first thing, and Crispin already mentioned it, is that much of what's going on with the aging population and the future decline in what we call the participation rate, so how many people out of the general population are working in the formal workforce at once, is that pig in the snake that Crispin mentioned. We have a situation where since 2000, roughly speaking, the baby boomers and their children have both been in the workforce at the same time. So we've had these two bulges in the snake in that sweet spot of 15 to 65, and because the data says, if you're 15 and a half, you're a full-time worker, you're super productive, and if you're 66 and a half, sorry, you're useless, nothing's happening. So we've picked this range, we've got these two bulges in it, and so you can see in this data here, the share of the population in the formal labour force has this little rise from 2000 to now. But that's really the product of these bulges in the population. And what I've tried to do is show you here that in the early 90s, the baby boomers were having children or had just had children. And in last year here, can you see my mouse pointer? Probably not. You can see the boomers are all shifting now out of that sweet spot range up to 65. And their children, and there's a lot of new migrants, but it's actually a very small effect here in this second pattern. They're also in the sweet spot of the working age. And so those bulges are going to flow through the population pyramid automatically. So that boost in the participation rate, that's got to go down. It's a product of something that happened 60 years ago that we can't undo today. That's really important. So a lot of what's going on is because we had a bulge in the population age pyramid in the 50s. Those people are retiring today. We had a 10-year period where them and their children were in the working age population, so it looked like it was great. But that pig has to pass through the snake. The other thing to keep in mind is that in 1990, or the mid-1990s, no one was saying, the participation rate, it's destroying our country. But all we're saying is, well, the participation rate might return back to the levels it was in the 90s when no one had a problem with it. It was perfectly fine, and it's probably still higher than it was in the 80s. So we're sort of saying that, we stuffed up the 70s, 80s and 90s somehow. It doesn't really make sense. You've got to understand this as these two bulges flowing through the pyramid. So this is what's going on when people are worried about the participation rate and the ageing population. But do you know what's really interesting? That most analysis still uses this 15 to 65 age bracket as some kind of the golden age, that people in that age bracket are somehow better and more productive. But let's have a look at what's going on in those ages. Let's look at the over 65. So this is the labour force participation rate, the share of the workforce, share of the population in that age who is working. We can see that since the early 2000s, the over 65s, they've got a rapidly growing participation. But you can see the under 19s, these 15 to 19-year-olds that we think are so amazingly productive, actually almost not working at all, right? Because they're mostly at school. Okay? I don't know why we're still using this 15 to 19-year-olds as if they're equal one-to-one. Now, if we look at the workforce size, because there are so many people in the over 65 age category, we can actually see there's more full-time workers over 65 than in the 15 to 19-year age bracket. But when we look at just that age window and say we need lots of people in these ages, we miss the fact that actually there's more people over 65 working than people under 19, yet you count them as being productive workers, but not any of them. It's a very bizarre and outdated assumption that I can't seem to convince anyone to stop using. I'm going to skip that. And now this is the really interesting thing. And I think this is where my mind was changed in many ways. That subconscious idea that ageing was costly, once you look at the data, you find even countries like Japan, who have twice as many people over 65 compared to working age, have almost the same number of workers compared to their population as Australia. So this is like off the charts ageing that Australia is going to come close to in 50 years' time, and yet their participation rate is almost the same, and in fact their economy is doing very well. So I think it's really quite amazing. We can also have a look at the population growth and economic performance of a number of peer nations, and you find that GDP per capita growth is negatively related to population growth. So those high population growth countries generally perform worse, and Australia's down here. There we are. Lots of population growth in this century, very low per capita GDP growth. And in terms of labour productivity, again, we're down here in the corner. Okay? We want to be back up here, right? Back up in the middle. So that's the first problem. Ageing is related to economic success globally. The second problem is, does high immigration actually reduce the age structure? This is the really interesting part, because there's a demographer, Peter MacDonald, who seems to be saying that high immigration does, but in fact his own work I've put here in these graphs is that yes, the effect at the end of this century of having an immigration rate of 50,000 net immigration at the same age distribution of the current immigration will reduce the old age dependency by 3 percentage points. Let's go back to here. Look at the X scale here. Whoa. Right? That's a rate, so that's from 25 to 40%. It's saying the first 50,000 immigration shifts you on this scale 0.03 horizontally to the left. That's all. Okay? The next 50,000 shift you 0.15 or 0.015 on this scale to the left, almost negligible. The next 50,000 after that shift you 0.09. It almost doesn't move you much. The first 50,000, yeah, okay, well, it's 3 percentage points different at the end of the century. But the next 50,000, much less. And the difference between 150 and 200,000 is negligible. Okay, because all those immigrants start aging as well. They all age at 12 months per year, just like the rest of us. But the effect on population size at the end of the century, every 50,000 increases the population size by nearly 7 million at the end of the century. So every 50,000 per year we add gives us another almost 7 million at the end of the century. Okay, so we have this declining effect on age, but a flat effect on population. So when we're over on the right-hand side, all we're doing is boosting population. Okay? Anyone who pretends they're changing the age structure because they've got 200,000 permanent migrants instead of 50 or 100,000 is just deceiving themselves. As Crispin already said, a lot of this, what's going on here is because of the skilled program. We can see in the mid-2000s the massive jump in skilled. Some of this boost in family is related to those same skilled migrants. And the number of occupations that we say we're short of is astronomical. 673 occupations. Apparently there's nobody here that can do them. And do you know what's in those occupations? Hairdresser, horse trainer. Like, I cut my own hair, okay? I don't know if you can tell. Maybe we do need more skills, but I think I could learn. Okay, these aren't things that you need to train for decades for. It's not like, oh, we need neurosurgeons. It's going to take us 15 years to train one locally. Not that we can't send people abroad to train and bring them back like many countries do, but it's a bizarre thing. And what we never seem to assess in this skilled program is the skills we're taking from other countries. All the doctors that have come here to Australia, the effect on human welfare from them having that expertise is probably much lower here than in their own home state in India. Okay, and in the medical profession, they really care about this. All of their journals discuss, are we draining the countries that need it most of their medical expertise? Is this a bad thing? The medical journals and the doctors themselves, they care. Okay? The economists and the boosters for big Australia don't seem to ever want to talk about this. As Crispin mentioned, Australia's high immigration program started in the mid-2000s, and you can see that after the property collapse and the financial crisis, we really haven't had any growth in household disposable income or hourly wages. What we have seen in this period, though, is that this rapid population growth is costing us in terms of accommodating it and maintaining the standards of infrastructure and housing and environment that we expect. So if we have a look, for example, at supplying water in Victoria, well, obviously you build a dam on the cheapest and most efficient valley first. Once that's gone, your next option is further away. Your next option is recycled water. Your next option is desalinated water. And the cost per kilolitre goes up. The second bottom bar there is recycling, and the bottom one's desalination, which is 7 times more expensive than the water from the dam. In terms of roads, you get the same thing. Rapid growth in already established cities. You can have a look at these highway costs. And then when we need to tunnel through our existing cities, the cost blows out per lane kilometre astronomically. We're talking, again, 7 or 8 times per kilometre of new road lane, the price. And as Jane probably has told you before, the sheer size and cost, I'm going to skip that one, is enormous. The costs per person for new hospitals is around $12,000 for every new person. That's how much we need to expand the health system to accommodate this person and maintain the standards. At a 1% population growth, that's $3 billion per year just to tread water on a per capita level in terms of hospital services. In childcare, it's $500 million per year just to duplicate the services we already have. And what that means is we're devoting a lot of construction and a lot of resources to build more of the same things we already have instead of improving the things we've got and expanding what we can do, what we can build as a country. Okay, and we got here $2 billion just in public transport from 1%. Now, if you start adding that stuff up, you get a fair chunk of GDP just in duplicating stuff that we already had. And all of that comes at a cost. Now, as our cities expand, Okay, our agricultural areas and our conservation areas come under political pressure. I mean, we could draw lines in the sand, but population growth gets used as a political excuse to not do that as well. So we waste a lot of political energy supporting population growth when we should be using that to conserve our quality of life, our environment, and improve our infrastructure rather than just duplicate it. So all three parts of this story that we've heard, the aging is a cost, whereas the data shows, and these world-famous economists, Darren Acemoglu from MIT, he's one of the most famous economists these days, he wrote a paper, and I wrote it in my report, and he said, oh, against my preconceptions, the aging economies perform radically better than the others. Okay, this is just what the data shows. And again, I had that same preconception because the propaganda is so powerful. So aging is not costly. Low immigration does stabilise the population. Okay, and it has a small effect on aging. But high immigration has almost no other effect except boosting the population. And thirdly, the cost of duplicating infrastructure is not small. It's not so easy. It's really not. It adds up at these high levels. All the successful countries have population growth at 0 or below 1%, and ours is between 1.5% and 2%. Okay, it's off the charts, particularly for a country of our size. So I'm going to wrap it up there. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.